We recently made a video that was something about vibes, recommending books with atmosphere. And we wanted to come up with a new way of, I guess, recommending broad range of books that maybe could be grouped together by what device, technique, writing style, thing, element that we like of those books, to kind of showcase, I guess, our taste, our sort of wide variety of books that we read, the fact that we are readers of books, and it doesn't really matter what the book is. We don't necessarily discriminate by genre. I guess the goal of our channel is to get people to maybe sample things outside of their comfort zone. And the first video we made in this new little, I guess, segment, if you want to call it something, on this channel, we talked about books with atmosphere and vibes and that kind of mood setting in the writing style. And we tried our best to, select a few books, some of our favorites that do that kind of thing across multiple genres. And we want to continue to make these kinds of videos. So without introing this too much, this one is about perspective through narrator. Books that play with perspective through narrator. Is that it?
Yeah, well, I think it's not just narrator, right?
Playing with perspective. Possibly through narrator.
Originally, our idea was books that play with narrator, and then we realized that it's actually a little bit broader than that. So we have a selection of books that do something unusual in how they use perspective of different characters, that how they use different narrators to elicit certain effects.
Yeah, and maybe it's something that you never really notice when you read. Maybe it's something you don't give a shit about when you read. But maybe trying some of these books will jog your memory about, oh, I tried this other book this one time and it kind of did a similar thing. And maybe you'll want to try out some of the books on this list. Some of the books we mention in these videos we've maybe mentioned in the past before, but we think that grouping them in this way shows that what you like in one genre may be present in multiple genres, and you might be willing to try them out.
It's also not something that you're always in the mood for. Like, sometimes I specifically don't want a book that's fucking around with anything unusual in how it's told. You want something a bit more straightforward. But sometimes I do find myself in the mood for something a little bit more out there in how it approaches writing perspective. Welcome back to StoryTube. So the first book that we wanted to mention that plays with perspective is a pretty famous one, and that is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Now, if you have seen the movie adaptation, which is also excellent, by the way, you might have an inkling of where this is going and why we think it fits this category. Without giving too much away, Gone Girl is a psychological thriller. We are following a married couple. We get both of their perspectives, and the wife then disappears. That is all I really want to say about the plot of the book, because everything else would be a spoiler, and I think going into this one as blind as possible is the way to go.
I think you could take the whole book as a bit of symbolism for manipulation.
Absolutely, and the reason that I think it fits very, very neatly into this category of playing with perspective specifically for this one is because it manipulates the reader through it. So whenever we're in a certain character's head, we're seeing specifically their point of view. They're not necessarily lying to us, but they have a very skewed version of reality and of what is happening. So it is a masterclass, really, in switching things up every time we change perspective and playing with the reader in that way. It's also just a really fun, propulsive book. If you're lucky enough to not have read this or watched the movie and not really know anything about it, I envy you. This is such a fun read and legitimately really well written. Don't let it fool you because it's in every airport and was adapted into a movie and is a bestseller. It's genuinely a really, really great book. And in this case, I would say that the fucking around with perspective doesn't add any complication to the narration. It doesn't make it more difficult to read or more complex, because it's done in a really, really engaging, fun way.
It's a pretty outrageous book, an outlandish book. Like, plot-wise, it's quite ridiculous. And, you know, suspend your disbelief when you're going into it. You may think, that may fool you into thinking that it's just a terrible book and it's terribly written. For what it is, it's an exceptionally well-written book, and there's a lot of talent in it, in the sense of pulling you through a plot that is completely addictive. It may make you roll your eyes. Your mileage may vary with these kinds of books. Domestic thrillers is typically not a genre that we read much of. They kind of flood the market and they flood the bestseller shelves because people love scandal.
And gossip. And, you know, 95% of them miss instead of hit. But honestly, I think Gone Girl might be the best of its genre. If you read one domestic thriller in your life,
read Gone Girl.
Make it Gone Girl. It's also not a new thing. Like, domestic thrillers are the natural progression of Victorian sensation novels and scandal novels.
Yeah.
So this has been around for a long time. People have always liked gossip and clutching their pearls and gasping. And you'll do plenty of that with Gone Girl.
An element of Gone Girl that overlaps with my first pick is multiple perspective about the same situation, and who do you believe and what is the truth. And I'm going to switch medium for a second, and my first recommendation is Where the Body Was by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, which is a 200-ish page graphic novel about a small street in suburban America where a body is found. We have roughly 8 or 9 characters whose lives kind of all intersect, intertwine on this one street. And we get all of those characters' quirks, personalities, but also their narration to us. There's multiple first-person narration of all of the characters living on this street, on the periphery, or witnesses to whatever it is that happened, the inciting incident in this book. It also sort of plays a little bit with structure in the sense that at the beginning, we don't really know what happened. Then there might be something that happens. The timeline is a little odd. And then we get the sort of full story leading up to that moment, again, from multiple perspectives. And honestly, this book is all about the characters. It's extremely efficient in getting you invested in the characters. Brubaker's writing is very trim here. This is one of the latest books that they've published. These guys, if you haven't watched my Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips video, I implore you to do so. Put a lot of work into that. This is one of their later collaborations. They've been collaborating for a very long time. And you can tell that they just have the secret sauce in this one. If you enjoy a little bit of breaking the fourth wall, the characters talk directly to you, the reader. And that's sometimes a very fun little device that writers use to really immerse you in something and make you the deciding factor in what the book is trying to tell you. And I like that as well, where the author can maybe place some responsibility on your plate as well. It creates a bit more engagement and a bit more work on your half as well. So this is Where the Body Was. Yeah, it's crime fiction in the same sort of realm as Gone Girl.
I would put a little asterisk there, like
I think it's just about people and their lives. And
yeah, like the cover and the title and the authors make it sound like it's a murder mystery, just like figuring out really. That's not what it is about. This is a book about memory and youth and nostalgia and looking back on life, and there just happens to be a body that gets found somewhere in the middle of it.
All of the characters are somewhat dissatisfied with how things have turned out for them, or on the other hand, they're youthfully optimistic and life starts to throw curveballs at them, and that's kind of what the book is about.
It's really, really great.
Where the Body Was, Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips.
The next book I wanted to mention is a pretty recent read for me, and I've talked about it on the channel before, and that is Human Acts by Nobel Prize winner Han Kang. This is a pretty short book. It's literary fiction. It's set in, well, it's translated from Korean and set in South Korea. And the reason that I picked it for this category and how it plays with perspective and narrator, this is specifically playing with narrator. So we have a number of chapters, and each chapter centers on one character, going from 1980, when there were very violently suppressed student protests, and then those characters reckoning with that as we advance through time. But they're only very loosely connected with each other. They all are, but they're loosely connected. You kind of have to figure that out yourself. So it almost works as a bunch of interconnected short stories held together by a theme. And each chapter has a different narrator. You have first person, you have second person, you have third person, depending on what suits the character, where the attention of the reader is drawn to. And it's very, very interesting for that reason. It's a very vibey book. Plot-wise, there's not much more to say other than what I just gave you as its general theme and structure and starting point. But the way we advance through time, but every time we advance, we're following a different character, just makes it a very unique reading experience. And it kind of hammers home this jigsaw of perspective and snapshots of this one event and the repercussions on a generation. So that's Human Acts by Han Kang.
My next choice is a recent read for me, and that is The Gutter Prayer by Gareth Hanrahan, which is a sort of steampunky, gas lampy fantasy set in one cobblestone alleyway filled city with an underworld and sewers that contain basically the old version of the city, with catacombs and tombs and weird creatures and all manner of sort of mystic, occult, dark magic. The Gutter Prayer is essentially following three thieves who are kind of uncovering a conspiracy to do with gods that used to run this city. The cool thing about The Gutter Prayer as well, and why it's on this list, is that it does also play with narrator and perspective. The opening prologue is in second person from the perspective of a burning building. So you are a building, you're inhabiting the city, you are the city, but it's also kind of trying to put you into the history of the city and what is actually alive within the stonework of the city. There are several interludes throughout the book as well, and little perspective shifts from our three main POVs. The majority of the book is kind of standard fantasy fare of multiple third-person perspectives. We have a young thief girl, we have a ghoul. There's also a man that is slowly turning to stone. He's a stone man called Spar. Kind of similar to the stone men in A Song of Ice and Fire, to be honest. And we also have an investigator who is investigating a robbery that happens. That's kind of the inciting incident of the book. At the beginning of the book, is investigating the circumstances around that. And our other main characters are investigating why did the robbery at the beginning of the book go wrong? Who's trying to set them up? And then these interludes come in with other perspectives that may be other kinds of beings that are waking up in this city. And like I said in the prologue, it's not a spoiler, it's the first kind of thing you read, is you might be inhabiting those buildings yourself. So in second person, if you happen to not know, it's the writer saying, you are doing this. You find yourself ablaze. Kind of a cool thing to read. In little spurts, obviously. If a whole book was like that, it'd be a bit maybe exhausting or kind of difficult to get through. But in these little spurts that he uses, Gareth Hanrahan uses it for a reason and for an effect. And it gets you feeling like this city is quite literally alive, sentient in a way, and that's cool. Also, if you like, Dark Souls or Bloodborne or those kinds of video games, Lovecraft horror, there's a lot of influence on this book from that.
The next one I wanted to mention is similar in some ways to Human Acts in terms of how it's playing with different characters' perspective to create like a jigsaw of a story. But this is less focused on narrator and more specifically on perspective, and it is telling more of one cohesive story, and that is Ohio by Stephen Markley. This was my favorite read of 2024. It is an exceptional book. And the way it plays with perspective is that here we have 4 parts, and each part is from the point of view of one character going through the same night. But we're not rehashing the exact same events, just from a different point of view. We are following them, like why they're coming back to their hometown where they grew up, what they're doing there. Slowly it begins to unravel, but we also get their bits and pieces of memory, thinking back to high school and what they were doing, what they did after high school, what they've been doing in the 10 years since, and what they know and think of other people in that town, in that community. It isn't a linear narration, and we don't know until the very end of the book the whole picture of what actually went on and what of these people and this town. There is a little bit of a central mystery, I suppose, but you're not really entirely sure the whole time what that central mystery is. That is one of the things that starts to unravel and that you learn as you go through the perspectives. I think it gives this book incredible reread value. I haven't reread it yet myself, but it's not the only book of its kind in terms of just giving you essentially what appears to be a full story or almost a full story from one character's POV, and then show you that it wasn't full by adding perspectives to it. But I think the way it does it was first of all extremely impactful and unique in the commitment to it. You truly have only the information with no hints as to what you might be missing if the character that you're following isn't aware that they're missing it. So it's extremely immersive. I'd say there is a cohesive writing style in the whole book, but you are very much aware of whose head you're in. There's a change, a shift. You're in somebody else's thoughts, somebody else's worldview, and he does it extremely effectively. So this is, once again, I think a masterclass in getting into a character's head and presenting you with a story from different sides, and playing with perspective in that way. So Ohio by Stephen Markley fits into this category.
Speaking of second person, the next book I'll recommend is Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky, a book we've both read actually. This is entirely in second person until the last page, is it?
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm not going to say why. I'm not going to say anything about it. I made a 6-minute video about this book. Essentially, the summary can be tax the ogres. This is a wonderful work of science fiction / fantasy with some very meaty symbolism and allegory for where we are right now and where civilization has been in cycles forever. This is a book about tyranny. It is a book about tyranny that you slip into. You allow yourself to get into because you don't really know any better. And that's all I'm going to say. Because I think the value of this book is sucking you in to a really, really gripping story that is hyper immersive because of that second person narration, and it plays with that. And there's a reason that it is in second person that you only find out at the end, really, that's kind of challenging you and your perspective. And it's about revolution. It's about what it looks like. It's about why it's necessary.
I think it's one of the best and most necessary uses of second person that I've ever read.
Yeah.
I think second person, like you were saying, is very, very immersive. I find it quite intense. Like, you're tired after reading a good bit in second person. I don't know if I could read a full novel written in second person.
Good thing about this is it's about 200 pages.
Yeah, it's the perfect length. He packs an incredible amount of world building and depth into that page count.
150 pages.
150 pages. But yeah, it's I think a very clever use of the second person narration. Next up, I wanted to briefly talk about Penance by Eliza Clark. I've talked about this book a couple of times on the channel, mostly I think in our top 10 books of 2024 video, because this book made the top 5. And I wanted to bring it up here because it does play with perspective and like sort of a meta narrative in an interesting way, and kind of different than most of the books that we have on this list. One of the reasons that we ended up calling it perspective rather than narrator, because what this book is, it's a fictional true crime novel. So what does that mean? So basically the premise of this book is that a murder happened in a school. So 3, I think, 16-year-old girls murdered one of their classmates brutally. And a journalist is now writing, or has written, a true crime book about this murder and compiled podcast transcripts, interviews, things like that. And what you're reading, the novel Penance, is that true crime book written by the journalist.
And those transcripts and stuff.
Yeah, so like that full book that exists in the fictional universe. So there's a couple of layers there. So there's a commentary on the true crime genre, and specifically about like online culture as to relating to true crime. But the way it plays with perspective is that we get different characters' points of view on the events, which are all different from each other. And again, like I've mentioned with a couple of books on this list, kind of come together to give you a full picture. But all of those perspectives are then again filtered through the perspective of the journalist writing the true crime book. So you're still removed from those perspectives. You're not in those characters' heads. You're reading another character's interpretation of the interviews and of the material and of the sources that he has access to, which makes it a very interesting book to read. Like I said, there's a lot of commentary on online culture and true crime, like podcasts, and this consuming other people's pain and trauma. But it's also just very interesting in how it's set up and structured, and there's a lot to think about with it, because it leaves you, not to spoil like anything in terms of how it ends or anything, but you never know as you're reading it what is true, which is ironic because you're reading something that is supposed to be true crime but also fictional at the same time. So that exists in a constant state of tension with itself. It's a really cool book. It's a great book. If you are a woman in and around 30, I would say you're going to relate to a lot of the cultural references that are made in this book, as to like, especially like early social media and early like internet online culture, which was just a bonus, honestly, and a book that I have never read in this way, about like the dark side of girlhood.
I think that's kind of partly why it resonated a little more with you than it did with me.
Probably, yeah.
Because it was quite heavy on the sort of online sphere and how it affected girls and their relationships in school, specifically at that time.
Yeah, you have like Tumblr and The Sims and like that kind of thing, fan fiction. So if any or all of those things resonate with you, you should read Penance.
The next book is one of the most famous books ever written, ever published, and it feels weird to like, you know, recommend it to many people who probably know what it is, especially in this sort of corner of sci-fi fantasy booktube that we are a part of. But it's Dune by Frank Herbert. But I mean, this book has an unusual narration style, perspective style, and it's third person omniscient. You are in everyone's heads all the time, switching all the time, at least for certain portions of the book, because some portions you do follow kind of specific characters later on, but specifically in like the first half of this book, you are bird's eye view of everybody, but then also in their heads, and you're getting their thoughts, but everyone at the same time. And it's kind of cool. It can be a little jarring if you're not used to it, but to me, I found Dune, the first time I read it, exceptionally immersive. It is kind of written like a thriller. My favorite scene in the book is not in the movies, and it is the perfect example of his use of narration and perspective hopping and that kind of omniscient view of what's going on. And it's the banquet scene. When the Atreides family arrive on Arrakis, there's a banquet where they're sort of welcomed, and there's sort of the formalities and all the sort of gentry and royalty and all these important fuckers welcome the Atreides family to Arrakis to kind of oversee their new patronage of this planet or whatever, or hand over the patronage of this planet to the Atreides family. And because of that sort of omniscient view and perspective, you get all of this kind of underlying tension and scheming, and you don't really trust anyone, and it just makes it so compelling to read. It's quite rare. I didn't find it like a particularly jarring or really noteworthy when I was reading it, but knowing that like this kind of narration perspective style is actually not that common, especially in modern books
and genre fiction.
I'd say it's more common in perhaps classics, but specifically within science fiction as well. Not really a technique that's used and a writing style that's used. I don't know, it just made all of the magic and wonder of it that bit more important, weighty. It just made it feel like you're reading an important work that you really need to pay attention to. This book could absolutely test your patience. If you want a sort of easy to digest, easy to read book, it's probably not the book for you. Not that it's difficult to read. There's just a lot in it. It's a little dense, but it's also very page-turny. And honestly, if you get into it and if you sink into it, if you allow yourself to be absorbed by it, it reads fast. Dune by Frank Herbert, I think, belongs on this list of messing with perspective, just because within the genre it's an unusual style. It's also one of my favorite books.
The last book I wanted to mention for this video is Sorry by Zoran Drenkar, which I don't have physically here, unfortunately. So here it is. And this is originally in German. It's translated into English. He is a Croatian-German author. And I read this book about 12 years ago, maybe 13 years ago at this stage, and it blew my mind. And it is critically acclaimed, so that validates me in my experience when I was 16. This is a crime psychological thriller, and the concept is we have a group of friends from college, I believe, who decide to start a business together. And they are in the business of apologizing for hire. So their services are, to apologize to anybody. And they get hired a lot by companies that, fire their employee, or by somebody who forgot their friend's birthday, like all sorts of things. They get hired and they do the apologizing for you. The inciting incident, basically, is that they are hired to go to a certain address to apologize to somebody. And when they arrive, the person that they're meant to apologize to is dead. And they have been hired to apologize to the corpse for killing them. So they get involved in this murder. And we go between perspectives between a couple of people in this friend group, but there's also a perspective of the murderer. And those perspectives are quite short. You don't know who the murderer is, but it's written in second person. So you, the reader, are the murderer. And it's quite jarring to read because suddenly it's not just this like close first person, I'm in a murderer's head. The book is telling you that it's you, that you did it. And it feels a bit like, hey, no, I didn't. I'm no murderer, excuse me. But once again, there's a very, very good reason for the use of second person. I think similar to Ogres, this is a book that always comes to mind when I think of, yes, this is a great use of second person. it adds to the book. It wouldn't be the same book without it, and it wouldn't be as impactful of a book without it. I highly recommend this book. I don't ever see it out in bookshops, even though it is translated into English, which is a pity because it's a great book.
And my last one is a little similar in a sense. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's a psychological thriller by Karen Slaughter, and it's Triptych. It's obviously a way of saying 3, the number 3. What does that mean? Or something that is fractured, or you can see it in multiple perspectives. I guess that's a running theme in a few of the books that we've mentioned in this list. This concerns the brutal murder of a young girl that may have included sexual violence or adult-child relations, which is something that Karen Slaughter writes a lot about. She certainly does not flinch away from, and she, being a female author within crime fiction, within the thriller genre, really holds up a mirror to the treatment of women in those genres and in like violence towards women. And let's really look at that, examine it in the real world as well, but also put you in the heads of men who might do this, and why do they do it, how well do they hide it, and how well do they hide it even when you're in their head, which means hiding it from themselves. And this book plays with that in terms of perspective and narrator. You may be following people who seem nice, who seem like they want to help, and they may be the exact people that did the awful thing. This is one thing that Karen Slaughter, for me, does really well, and is kind of the thing that I like about her. She can sometimes get a little silly thriller, everything kind of gets mustache twirly villain towards the end, and it gets a little ridiculous. But for, 85-90% of the book, it'll be extremely immersive in that sense, and very interesting if you want to go to that dark place. If you're willing to read books like this. This is also the kind of book that if you just don't want to read this, do not. It is exactly what it says on the tin. So that is Triptych by Karen Slaughter. It's the first book in the Will Trent series. There is a TV show now called Will Trent. I think it might be on Prime or one of those. And honestly, that show is nothing like these books at all. It's just Will Trent in name. They turned that into sort of a quirky comedy following a detective. These books are not that at all. They are not funny. They are not lighthearted. They are anything but. So yeah, if you've seen that show and you're seeing me recommend this book and you're like, what? It's not the same. So yeah, Triptych by Karen Slaughter.
That's it. Those are the recommendations for today, based on books that play with perspective and narrator and are just a little bit unusual in that regard, to great effect and varying degrees of complexity and intention. As always, please, if you have any recommendations, any ideas of books that you like, that you've heard of, that would fit into this category, let us know in the comments. Would love to get some recommendations. And also let us know what type of book you would look for. What thing do you enjoy that is not specific to genre or subgenre that you would like some recommendations for? Like the video if you liked it. Comment down below with your own recommendations. If this is your first time finding our channel, consider subscribing, sticking around. We're pretty cool. Thanks for watching, and we shall see you soon for maybe the next installment in these videos. We'll see you next time.